The millionaire swore he needed no one, until the virgin babysitter's innocence broke all his pride. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. Some people believe that innocence is weakness. Aaliyah Moore had heard that whisper her entire life. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Riverside Drive penthouse, casting golden streaks across the marble floor. 24-year-old Aaliyah moved quietly through the spacious living room, her worn canvas sneakers silent against the cold stone. In her arms, 3-year-old Camden Whitmore giggled softly, his tiny fingers tangled in her natural curls. "Aaliyah, airplane," he whispered, mindful not to wake his parents who were still sleeping in the master suite. She smiled, that same gentle expression that had carried her through years of caring for other people's children while dreaming of a family of her own. "Quiet airplane, little man," she whispered back, lifting him gently and making soft whooshing sounds. The contrast between her simple cotton dress, faded from too many washes, and the opulent surroundings never bothered her. Mrs. Whitmore's designer handbags cost more than Aaliyah's monthly rent in her tiny studio apartment in Queens, but she had long ago made peace with the different worlds she navigated daily. Camden's laughter filled the space as she carried him toward the kitchen, where she began preparing his breakfast with practiced efficiency. 2 slices of whole wheat toast, cut into triangles, fresh strawberries arranged in a smiley face, a small cup of orange juice, no pulp. These small rituals of care were where Aaliyah felt most herself, nurturing, protecting, loving without conditions. "Tell me the story about the brave princess," Camden requested, settling into his high chair. Aaliyah's hands paused over the strawberries. She had told him many stories over the past 8 months of working for his family, but this one was his favorite. It was about a princess who chose to wait for true love, who believed that some things in life were worth preserving for the right person. "Once upon a time," she began, her voice carrying the musical cadence that made Camden's eyes grow wide with wonder, "there was a princess who lived in a beautiful castle, but unlike other princesses, she had never been kissed by a prince." "Why not?" Camden asked, though he knew the answer by heart. "Because she was waiting for something special, something real." Aaliyah's own heart fluttered as she spoke the words. At 24, she was the only one among her friends who had never shared herself completely with anyone, not because she was afraid, but because she believed, despite everyone telling her she was naive, that some gifts should only be given once. The elevator chime echoed through the apartment, followed by the mechanical hum of ascending floors. Aaliyah glanced at the digital display in the kitchen. 7:47 a.m., Mrs. Whitmore had mentioned that Camden's father would be traveling this week, but perhaps his plans had changed. She continued feeding Camden, humming softly while he ate his strawberries one by one, arranging the stems in a neat line on his plate. The morning light shifted, growing brighter, and she found herself thinking about her own dreams, the small hopes she carried like secrets. A family of her own someday. A man who would see past her quiet nature to the depth of love she had to offer. A home where laughter lived in every corner. The elevator chimed again, this time stopping at their floor. Aaliyah straightened, smoothing her simple dress. Mrs. Whitmore typically slept until 9, and Mr. Whitmore was usually at his office by dawn, but the penthouse had been sold last month to a new owner, someone Mrs. Whitmore had mentioned only in passing. A businessman, wealthy, private. Heavy footsteps echoed in the marble foyer, confident and measured, not the hurried shuffle of Mr. Whitmore or the clicking heels of Mrs. Whitmore's morning routine. Camden looked up from his breakfast, strawberry juice staining his small lips. "Who's that, Aaliyah?" Before she could answer, a deep voice cut through the morning quiet, cold, commanding, and utterly unfamiliar. "I wasn't expecting anyone to be here." Aaliyah turned toward the kitchen entrance, her heart suddenly beating faster. Standing in the doorway was a man who seemed to command the very air around him. Tall, impeccably dressed even at this early hour, with dark hair and eyes that held the weight of someone accustomed to having every question answered before it was asked. This had to be Sebastian Kane, the new owner Mrs. Whitmore had barely mentioned, the man who had purchased this penthouse with the casualness of someone buying coffee. "Mr. Kane," she said softly, instinctively moving closer to Camden. "I'm Aaliyah Moore. I take care of Camden for the Whitmores." "Mrs. Whitmore said the transition would be gradual and that my services might still be needed." His gaze moved from her to Camden, then back to her face. There was something unsettling about the way he looked at her, not unkind, but intense, as if he was trying to solve a puzzle he hadn't expected to encounter. The Whitmores failed to mention they were leaving their babysitter behind, he said, his tone neutral, but with an edge that made Aaliyah's chest tighten. I can leave, she said quickly, already reaching for Camden. I didn't mean to intrude. Mrs. Whitmore said, no. The single word stopped her mid-motion. Sebastian Kane stepped further into the kitchen, his presence filling the space in a way that made the vast penthouse suddenly feel intimate. Camden is my nephew, he said, and something shifted in his voice, barely perceptible, but Aaliyah caught it. Mrs. Whitmore is my late brother's wife. She didn't mention that detail, did she? Aaliyah felt the world tilt slightly. Camden wasn't just any child she cared for. He was this man's family. The complexity of the situation settled over her like morning fog. She didn't explain the full situation, Aaliyah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Sebastian's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in something that looked almost like curiosity. And yet, you're here, taking care of him, as if he were your own. Something in his tone made Aaliyah lift her chin, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. He is precious to me, Mr. Kane. Every child I care for becomes precious to me. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the kitchen. Camden continued eating his strawberries, oblivious to the tension crackling in the air around him. Finally, Sebastian spoke, his voice quieter than before. Mrs. Whitmore is moving to California next week. Permanently. Aaliyah's heart dropped. She had known this day would come eventually, but hearing it stated so matter-of-factly made it feel like a physical blow. And Camden will stay with me. The implications hung in the air between them. Aaliyah felt her carefully constructed world shifting, rearranging itself around this stranger who had just walked into their morning routine and changed everything. I see, she managed to say, though she saw nothing clearly at all. Sebastian Kane studied her face for another long moment, and Aaliyah had the unsettling feeling that he was reading thoughts she hadn't even formed yet. Then he said the words that would change everything. I'm going to need a nanny. The silence stretched between them like a tightrope waiting to snap. Aaliyah's hands trembled slightly as she wiped Camden's face with a paper towel, her mind racing through 1,000 questions she couldn't voice. Sebastian Kane stood motionless in the kitchen doorway, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the domestic scene before him, yet something in his posture suggested this wasn't entirely foreign territory. Uncle Bastian, Camden suddenly squealed, finally noticing the man who had been watching them. He reached his small arms toward Sebastian, strawberry-stained fingers grasping at the air. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Sebastian's rigid shoulders softened as he approached the high chair, and when he lifted Camden into his arms, Aaliyah caught a glimpse of something vulnerable beneath the businessman's armor. Hey, buddy, Sebastian murmured, his voice losing its edge. Did you have breakfast? Aaliyah made smiley strawberries, Camden announced proudly, pointing to his empty plate. And she told me about the princess who waits for love. Aaliyah felt heat rise to her cheeks. So of all the stories Camden could have mentioned, Sebastian's gaze found hers over Camden's head, and she saw something flicker in his dark eyes, curiosity perhaps, or amusement. The princess who waits for love? It's just a children's story, she said quietly, busying herself with clearing the breakfast dishes. About patience, Sebastian said, and it wasn't a question. Before Aaliyah could respond, Camden wiggled in his uncle's arms. Can Aaliyah stay forever? Please? She makes the best pancakes and she knows all the songs. The innocence of the request hung in the air, but Aaliyah heard the deeper longing beneath it. This little boy had already experienced too much loss. His father gone, his mother preparing to move across the country. Now he faced the possibility of losing the one consistent presence in his small world. Sebastian set Camden down carefully, his jaw tightening. Camden, why don't you go play with your blocks in the living room? Miss Moore and I need to talk. Adult talk? Camden asked with the solemnity only a 3-year-old could muster. Adult talk, Sebastian confirmed. As Camden scampered away, dragging his favorite stuffed elephant, Aaliyah felt the weight of Sebastian's attention return to her. She continued loading the dishwasher, using the mundane task to steady her nerves. You've been caring for him for 8 months, Sebastian said. It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. Since Mrs. Whitmore went back to work, Aaliyah confirmed. He's a wonderful child, gentle, curious. He just needs consistency, and you provide that. Again, not a question. Aaliyah finally turned to face him, surprised by the intensity of his gaze. I try to. Children need to feel safe, loved. especially children who've experienced loss. Something shifted in Sebastian's expression. His father was my younger brother. Daniel died in a car accident 14 months ago. The simple statement carried the weight of grief that Aaliyah recognized. She had seen it in Camden's occasional nightmares, in the way he sometimes called out for his daddy in his sleep. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Camden talks about him sometimes. He says his daddy taught him to build towers with blocks." "Daniel was good with him," Sebastian admitted, his voice roughening slightly. "Better than I ever expected to be." The vulnerability in his admission surprised her. This man who commanded boardrooms and acquired penthouses spoke about a 3-year-old as if he were the more intimidating adversary. "Children don't need perfection, Mr. Kane," Aaliyah said gently. "They need presence, patience, love, things I'm not known for. Perhaps you've never had reason to develop them." Their eyes met across the kitchen, and Aaliyah felt something electric pass between them, an understanding that went beyond words. She saw past his tailored suit and commanding presence to the man who was genuinely worried about caring for his orphaned nephew. "The position," Sebastian said abruptly, returning to business mode, "live-in nanny, full-time care. The salary would be substantial." Aaliyah's breath caught. "Live-in? Camden needs stability. Familiar faces. You've already established a bond with him." Sebastian moved closer, close enough that she caught the subtle scent of his cologne, something expensive and understated. "The guest suite on the 3rd floor has been prepared. Private entrance, full amenities." Her mind reeled. She had never lived anywhere but her cramped studio apartment in Queens, taking the subway to Manhattan each morning. The idea of staying in a penthouse, of being available for Camden whenever he needed her. "What about Mrs. Whitmore?" she asked. "Leaves Sunday. Camden will need the transition to be as smooth as possible. Sunday, 4 days away. I would need to think about it," Aaliyah said, though her heart was already answering for her. "Of course." Sebastian reached into his jacket and withdrew a business card, his fingers brushing hers as he handed it to her. The brief contact sent an unexpected jolt through her system. "My number. When you decide." Camden's laughter echoed from the living room, followed by the sound of blocks tumbling across the hardwood floor. "He builds towers and knocks them down," Aaliyah said with a small smile. "Over and over. He says he's practicing being brave." "Brave?" "Like his daddy taught him. Build something even if it falls down. Build it again." Sebastian was quiet for a long moment, watching her face. "And you? What are you practicing to be brave for?" The question caught her off guard. She looked down at his business card, running her thumb over the embossed lettering. "Sebastian Kane, CEO, Kane Hospitality Group." "I'm not sure yet," she answered honestly. He studied her for another moment, and she had the strange feeling he was seeing more than she was revealing. "The offer stands," he said finally. Then more softly, "Camden needs you." As he turned to leave, Aaliyah found her voice. "Mr. Kane." He paused in the doorway. "What happens if I say yes? I mean, really happens?" Sebastian Kane looked back at her, his dark eyes holding secrets she couldn't decipher. "Then everything changes, Miss Moore. For all of us." The weight of his words settled over her as his footsteps faded down the marble hallway, leaving her alone with a decision that felt far more significant than a simple job offer, because deep in her heart, she already knew her answer, and somehow she suspected he knew it too. Some decisions are made with the mind. Others are made with the heart long before the mind catches up. Aaliyah stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror of her studio apartment bathroom, Sebastian Kane's business card propped against the faucet like a question mark she couldn't answer. 3 days had passed since his offer, and she had replayed their conversation dozens of times, searching for hidden meanings in every pause, every glance. The morning light filtering through her single window was grey and tired, matching her mood. In 12 hours, Mrs. Whitmore would be boarding a plane to California, leaving Camden behind with an uncle who admitted he didn't know the first thing about raising a child. Her phone buzzed against the bathroom counter. A text from her best friend Jasmine. "Girl, you've been MIA for days. Everything okay?" Aaliyah typed back quickly. "Big decision to make. Call you later." But even as she sent the message, she knew she couldn't explain this to Jasmine. How could she tell her oldest friend that she was considering moving into a penthouse with a millionaire stranger, that something about Sebastian Kane's dark eyes haunted her thoughts, that she felt pulled toward this opportunity like metal to a magnet? A knock at her door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Aaliyah frowned, checking the time on her phone. 8:47 a.m. She wasn't expecting anyone. She opened the door to find Mrs. Whitmore standing in the narrow hallway, looking uncharacteristically nervous. The older woman's usually perfect blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her designer clothes had been replaced with jeans and a sweater. "Mrs. Whitmore, is everything okay? Is Camden—" "Camden is fine. He's with Sebastian." Mrs. Whitmore twisted her hands together. "May I come in?" Aaliyah stepped aside, suddenly aware of how small her apartment looked through someone else's eyes. The fold-out couch that served as her bed, the tiny kitchenette, the single window that looked out onto a brick wall. "I came to talk to you about Sebastian's offer," Mrs. Whitmore said without preamble, "and to tell you things I probably should have said months ago." Aaliyah felt her stomach tighten. "What kind of things?" Mrs. Whitmore sat on the edge of the couch, her composure cracking slightly. "Sebastian isn't just Camden's uncle, Aaliyah. He's the reason I can afford to start over in California. The reason Camden has a trust fund that will secure his future. The reason I was able to grieve my husband without worrying about losing our home." The words settled between them like puzzle pieces Aaliyah was only beginning to understand. "He's been taking care of you both," she said softly. "From the day Daniel died." Mrs. Whitmore's voice caught. "Sebastian flew in from Tokyo for the funeral, saw the financial mess we were in, and quietly fixed everything. He never asked for credit, never demanded anything in return. He just took care of us." Aaliyah thought about the man who had stood in the kitchen 3 days ago, admitting he didn't know how to care for a child. "But he seems so distant with Camden." "That's not distance, honey. That's fear." Mrs. Whitmore met her eyes. "Sebastian Kane has built an empire by never needing anyone. But Camden needs everything. Love, patience, stability, comfort. All the things Sebastian convinced himself he doesn't know how to give. Then why is he taking custody? Because despite what he tells himself, Sebastian is the most loyal man I've ever known. He would rather struggle to learn how to be what Camden needs than let him go into the system or with strangers." Mrs. Whitmore leaned forward. "But he can't do it alone, Aaliyah. And more importantly, he knows it." The conversation she'd had with Sebastian echoed in Aaliyah's mind. The way he'd watched her with Camden, the vulnerability she'd glimpsed beneath his composed exterior. "Why are you telling me this?" Aaliyah asked. "Because in 8 months of watching you with my son, I've never seen him happier or more secure. And because yesterday, when Sebastian thought I wasn't listening, I heard him on a phone call with his assistant, asking about pediatric therapists and child development specialists. He's terrified, Aaliyah, but he's trying." Mrs. Whitmore stood, smoothing her sweater. "The truth is, you're not just a nanny to Camden. You're his anchor. And I think you might be Sebastian's too, even if he doesn't realize it yet." After Mrs. Whitmore left, Aaliyah sat in the silence of her small apartment, turning the business card over in her hands. She thought about Camden's laugh, about the way he'd reached for his uncle with complete trust. She thought about Sebastian's admission that his brother had been better with children than he ever expected to be. But mostly she thought about the moment their eyes had met across the kitchen and the electric feeling that something significant was beginning. Her phone rang, jolting her from her thoughts. Sebastian's name appeared on the screen. "Miss Moore." His voice was as controlled as ever, but she caught an undertone of something else. Uncertainty, maybe. "Mr. Kane, Camden has been asking for you. He's having difficulty with the transition. Mrs. Whitmore leaves tonight, and he's becoming increasingly upset." Aaliyah could hear Camden crying in the background, and her heart clenched. "Is he okay?" "Physically, yes. Emotionally." Sebastian paused. "I don't know what I'm doing, Miss Moore. I've built hotels in 12 countries, but I can't figure out how to comfort a 3-year-old. The admission cost him something. She could hear it in his voice. This man who commanded boardrooms was asking for help with something infinitely more important than any business deal. "I can be there in an hour," she said, before she could second-guess herself. "And the position?" Aaliyah closed her eyes, seeing her reflection in the cracked mirror, seeing the small apartment that had been home for 2 years, seeing the life she was about to leave behind. "I'll take it," she said quietly. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long, she wondered if the call had dropped. "Thank you," Sebastian finally said, and those 2 words carried more weight than any contract. After she hung up, Aaliyah began packing her few belongings, her hands moving automatically while her mind raced ahead to what came next. She was about to move into a world she'd only glimpsed through Camden's stories and Mrs. Whitmore's casual mentions. But as she folded her simple dresses and placed her worn books into boxes, one thought kept returning. She wasn't just taking a job, she was walking into a story that was already changing all of them. Walking into someone else's life is like stepping into a river mid-current. You never know how deep the water runs until you're already swept away. The third-floor guest suite was larger than Aaliyah's entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park, where the late afternoon sun painted the autumn leaves in shades of gold and crimson. The bedroom featured a king-size bed with crisp white linens, a sitting area with a velvet armchair, and a marble bathroom that gleamed like something from a magazine. But it was the small details that made her breath catch. Fresh white roses in a crystal vase on the nightstand, a basket of expensive toiletries, and on the mahogany desk, a framed photo she recognized, Camden building blocks with his father. Someone had thought to place a piece of familiarity in this overwhelmingly elegant space. "Aaliyah, you came back," Camden's voice echoed from the doorway, before his small body crashed into her legs, wrapping around her like a lifeline. She knelt to his level, smoothing his dark hair away from his tear-stained cheeks. "Of course I came back, sweetheart. I told you I would." "Mama left on the big airplane," Camden whispered, his lower lip trembling. "Uncle Bastian said she'll call me, but airplanes go very far away." Aaliyah's heart broke a little more. In the span of 14 months, this little boy had lost his father, and now watched his mother disappear into the sky. "Your mama loves you very much, Camden. Sometimes grown-ups have to go places to feel better, but that doesn't mean they stop loving us. Are you going to leave too?" The question hung in the air like a prayer waiting for an answer. Aaliyah cupped his small face in her hands, looking directly into his eyes, so much like his uncle's, but without the carefully constructed walls. "I'm going to stay right here with you," she said firmly. "In fact, I'm going to sleep just down the hall. Would you like to see my new room?" Camden's eyes widened. "You live here now? Like Uncle Bastian?" "Like Uncle Bastian," she confirmed, and something in her chest fluttered at the words. They were interrupted by footsteps on the marble stairs. Sebastian appeared in the doorway, having changed from his morning suit into dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that made him look younger, more approachable. His hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his hands through it. "I wasn't sure about the flowers," he said without preamble, his gaze finding the white roses. "Mrs. Whitmore mentioned you liked them, but I didn't know what kind." The fact that he had asked Mrs. Whitmore about her preferences sent an unexpected warmth through Aaliyah's chest. "They're beautiful, thank you." "Uncle Bastian got flowers for Aaliyah," Camden announced, bouncing on his toes. "Like when Daddy got flowers for Mama." An awkward silence settled over the room. Sebastian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and Aaliyah saw the moment when his walls started rebuilding themselves. "It's just a welcome gesture," Sebastian said stiffly. "Professional courtesy." But Camden, oblivious to adult complications, had already moved on. "Can we have dinner together? All three of us? Like a family?" The word family seemed to echo in the elegant space, bouncing off marble and crystal before settling into the silence between the three of them. Aaliyah watched Sebastian's face carefully, seeing the war between longing and self-protection playing out in his dark eyes. "I usually eat in my office," Sebastian said finally. "But not tonight," Aaliyah said gently, surprising herself with her boldness. "Tonight Camden needs routine, stability. That means dinner at the table, bath time at 7, and bedtime stories." Sebastian studied her face, and she had the strange feeling he was measuring her somehow. "You're quite decisive for someone who's been here less than an hour. Children need structure, Mr. Kane, especially children who've experienced trauma." "Sebastian," he said quietly. "Excuse me? Call me Sebastian. If you're going to live here, if you're going to be—" He paused, searching for words. "Part of this, then we should dispense with formalities." The shift felt significant, like crossing an invisible threshold. "Sebastian," she repeated, and his name felt different on her tongue than she'd expected. Warmer, more intimate. "Yay! Sebastian and Aaliyah!" Camden clapped his hands. "Now we can have family dinner." Neither adult corrected him this time. Dinner was an exercise in careful navigation. The formal dining room had been set for 3, though Sebastian looked distinctly uncomfortable at the head of the mahogany table. Camden chattered throughout the meal, filling the silences with stories about his day and questions about everything from why airplanes flew so high to whether Uncle Sebastian knew how to make pancakes. "I don't cook," Sebastian admitted when Camden asked about breakfast plans. "Aaliyah makes the best pancakes in the whole world," Camden declared with the certainty only a 3-year-old could possess. "She puts blueberries in them, and they look like little smiles." "Smiley pancakes," Sebastian repeated, and Alia caught something almost like amusement in his voice. "I could teach you," she offered impulsively, then immediately regretted it. "I mean, if you wanted to learn. For Camden." Sebastian's gaze met hers across the table. "I think I need teaching." There was challenge in his voice, but also something else. Curiosity, maybe, or invitation. "I think everyone can learn something new," she said carefully. "Even billionaires?" Camden piped up, though he pronounced it billionaires. Sebastian's lips twitched. "Especially billionaires." After dinner, Alia supervised Camden's bath, while Sebastian retreated to his office. She could hear the low murmur of his voice through the walls, business calls that stretched into the evening, the sound of a man more comfortable with spreadsheets than bedtime routines. But when she tucked Camden into his race car bed and began reading Good Night Moon, Sebastian appeared in the doorway. He didn't enter the room, just stood there listening as she read about the quiet old lady whispering hush. "Good night, nobody. Good night, mush," she read softly, and Camden's eyelids grew heavy. "Good night, Alia," Camden whispered as she kissed his forehead. "Good night, sweetheart." "Good night, Uncle Bastian," Camden called to the figure in the doorway. "Good night, Camden," Sebastian said, his voice rougher than usual. As they walked down the hallway together, their footsteps muffled by the expensive carpet, Sebastian spoke quietly. "He's never settled that easily for me." "Children sense when adults are comfortable," Alia said. "The more at ease you become with bedtime routines, the easier they'll be for him." They paused outside her door, the space between them charged with something Alia couldn't quite name. Up close, she could see the fine lines around Sebastian's eyes, the way his expensive cologne couldn't quite mask the scent of stress and exhaustion. "Thank you," he said simply, "for today, for saying yes. Thank you for trusting me with him." Sebastian's gaze searched her face in the dim hallway lighting. "I have a confession to make, Alia." Her heart skipped at the way he said her name, like he was testing how it felt. "What kind of confession?" "I've never lived with anyone before. Not like this. I don't know the rules." The admission hung between them, vulnerable and honest. Alia felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of the man beneath the businessman's armor. "Neither have I," she admitted. They stood there for a moment longer, the silence filled with possibility and uncertainty in equal measure. "Well then," Sebastian said finally, his voice carrying a hint of something that might have been a smile, "I suppose we'll figure it out together." As Alia closed her bedroom door behind her, she realized that somewhere between dinner and bedtime stories, the dynamic had shifted. They weren't just employer and employee anymore, but what they were becoming. That was a question neither of them was ready to answer. The most dangerous moments are the quiet ones, when walls come down and hearts forget to guard themselves. Alia woke to the sound of muffled voices drifting up from the kitchen below, one high and excited, the other deep and clearly frustrated. She checked her phone. 6:23 a.m. Camden was an early riser, but Sebastian usually left for the office before dawn. She pulled on her robe and padded barefoot down the marble stairs, following the scent of something burning, and Camden's increasingly worried chatter. "It's okay, Uncle Bastian. Alia says mistakes are just practice." "This isn't practice, Camden. This is a disaster." Alia reached the kitchen doorway and stopped, taking in the scene before her. Sebastian stood at the massive Viking stove, his usually immaculate hair disheveled, wearing dark jeans and a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up. The marble countertops were dusted with flour, an overturned mixing bowl dripped batter onto the floor, and smoke curled from what had once been pancakes in the pan. Camden sat at the breakfast bar in his dinosaur pajamas, chin propped on his hands, watching his uncle with the fascination of someone witnessing a scientific experiment gone wrong. "We wanted to surprise you," Camden announced when he spotted Alia. "Uncle Bastian said he could make smiley pancakes, but they don't look very happy." Sebastian turned at the sound of Camden's voice, and Alia felt her breath catch. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing a glimpse of tanned skin, and there was flour in his dark hair. But it was the expression on his face that made her heart skip, a mixture of embarrassment and determination that made him look younger, more human. "I may have overestimated my culinary abilities," he said dryly, turning off the burner and surveying the damage. "Just a little," Alia said, unable to hide her smile as she stepped into the kitchen. "What exactly were you trying to make?" "Smiley blueberry pancakes," Camden replied before Sebastian could answer. "But Uncle Bastian forgot the smiles, and I think he forgot some other things too." Sebastian ran a hand through his flour-dusted hair. "I followed the recipe exactly. I don't understand what went wrong." Alia moved closer, close enough to catch the scent of his cologne mixed with the chaos of their baking attempt. She peered into the mixing bowl, noting the lumpy consistency and the unopened package of baking powder on the counter. "Cooking isn't like running a business," she said gently. "It's not about following instructions perfectly. It's about feeling your way through it." "I don't do feeling my way," Sebastian said, his jaw tightening slightly. "I do research, planning, execution. That's why the pancakes are sad," Camden observed with 3-year-old wisdom. "They need feelings." Despite himself, Sebastian's lips twitched. "Feelings. Here," Aaliyah said, reaching for a clean mixing bowl. "Let me show you." She was acutely aware of Sebastian watching her every movement as she measured ingredients, her hands working from memory rather than strict measurement. Cooking is about intuition. You add a little more milk when the batter feels too thick, a pinch more salt when something tastes flat. "That's not very scientific," Sebastian observed, moving to stand beside her. His proximity made her pulse quicken. "No," she agreed, adding vanilla extract with practiced ease. "It's about trust, trusting your senses, trusting the process. Things I'm not good at." The admission was quiet, meant more for himself than for her, but Aaliyah caught it. She looked up to find him watching her with an intensity that made her chest flutter. "Everyone can learn," she said softly, then louder. "Camden, want to help us make new pancakes?" "Yes. Can I crack the eggs?" "1 egg," Aaliyah said, lifting him onto a step stool. Very carefully, she guided Camden's small hands as he cracked an egg into the bowl, fishing out a small piece of shell while Sebastian watched the process with the focus he probably applied to million-dollar negotiations. "Now comes the magic part," Aaliyah said, handing Camden a wooden spoon. "We mix it, but not too much. Lumps are okay. Perfect pancakes come from imperfect batter." "That doesn't make sense," Sebastian said, but his voice carried more curiosity than criticism. "Trust me," Aaliyah said, meeting his gaze. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went beyond pancake batter. Sebastian moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Show me." His voice was rougher than necessary for a cooking lesson, and Aaliyah felt heat rise in her cheeks. She placed her hands over his on the spoon, guiding his movements as they stirred the batter together. His hands were larger than hers, strong and warm, and she tried to ignore the way her pulse accelerated at the contact. "Feel that?" she asked quietly. "The resistance? When it feels like this, you stop, even if it's not smooth." "Even if it's not perfect," Sebastian repeated, his voice low. "Even if it's not perfect." They stood that way for a moment longer than necessary, her hands covering his, the kitchen filled with nothing but the sound of Camden humming and the quiet hum of morning light through the windows. "My turn! My turn!" Camden interrupted, and they broke apart quickly, both reaching for the spatula at the same time. Their fingers brushed again, and Aaliyah felt electricity shoot up her arm. "Sorry," Sebastian said, pulling back. "It's fine," she managed, though her voice sounded breathless to her own ears. The first pancake went into the pan with a satisfying sizzle. Aaliyah added 3 blueberries in a triangle for eyes and nose, then drew a curved line with batter for a smile. "See?" she said to Camden. "Happy pancakes." "Uncle Bastien, you try the next one," Camden commanded. Sebastian took the ladle with the seriousness of someone accepting a court document. His first attempt at a smiley face resulted in something that looked more like abstract art, but Camden clapped enthusiastically. "It's beautiful, Uncle Bastien. It looks like a friendly monster." "A friendly monster," Sebastian repeated, and this time he did smile, a real smile that transformed his entire face. They cooked in comfortable rhythm after that, Sebastian gradually relaxing as he got the hang of the process. Aaliyah found herself stealing glances at him as he worked, noting the way he loosened up when he stopped trying to control every variable, the way his rare laughs at Camden's commentary made her stomach flutter. When they finally sat down to eat, Camden between them at the breakfast bar, the morning felt different, softer, more intimate than any of them had expected. "These are the best pancakes ever," Camden declared through a mouthful of blueberries. "Even the monster ones?" Sebastian asked. "Especially the monster ones." "Aaliyah, do you think Uncle Bastien is getting better at feelings?" Aaliyah caught Sebastian's gaze across Camden's head, seeing something vulnerable in his dark eyes. "I think he's learning," she said carefully. "Good," Camden said with satisfaction. "Because tomorrow I want to learn how to make cookies, the kind with chocolate chips that look like smiles." Sebastian groaned softly. "More smiling food?" "All food should be happy," Camden announced with the authority of a food critic. After breakfast, as Aaliyah cleaned up and Sebastian prepared for his delayed departure to the office, Camden settled into his playroom with his blocks. The kitchen felt too quiet suddenly, filled with the weight of what had just happened between them. "Thank you," Sebastian said quietly, adjusting his tie. He had transformed back into the businessman, but flour still dusted his collar. "For the lesson." "It was just pancakes," Aaliyah said, though they both knew it was more than that. Was it? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them was ready to address. Aaliyah busied herself wiping down the already clean counter, hyper-aware of Sebastian's presence behind her. "Aaliyah," she turned, surprised by the softness in his voice. "I'll be late tonight. Board meeting. Will you and Camden be all right?" "Of course. We'll be fine." Sebastian nodded, but he didn't move toward the door. Instead, he stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "You were right," he said quietly. "About trust. About feeling your way through things." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Sebastian, I haven't trusted anyone in a very long time, Aaliyah. But you—" He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "You make it seem possible." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone in the kitchen with the lingering scent of his cologne and the echo of words that changed everything. Because somewhere between flour fights and smiley pancakes, Sebastian Kane had just admitted he was beginning to trust her, and that terrified her, almost as much as the realization that she was beginning to trust him too. Sometimes the heart breaks open at exactly the moment it's learning to trust again. The call came at 2:47 a.m., jolting Aaliyah from sleep with its sharp electronic cry. She reached for her phone, disoriented, expecting to see Sebastian's name. He had warned her about late business calls. Instead, the screen showed unknown number. "Hello?" she whispered, padding to her window overlooking the city lights. "Is this Aaliyah Moore?" The voice was female, professional, with an edge of urgency that made Aaliyah's stomach clench. "Yes. Who is this?" "This is Dr. Rivera from Mount Sinai Emergency. We have Sebastian Kane here. You're listed as his emergency contact." The words hit her like ice water. "Emergency contact? What happened? Is he okay?" "Car accident about an hour ago. He's stable, but he's asking for you. Can you come in?" Aaliyah's mind raced. Emergency contact. She'd been living there less than a week. Yes, I'll be right there. But I have a child with me. Bring him. Mr. Kane is quite insistent about seeing both of you." The line went dead, leaving Aaliyah staring at her phone in the dark. Her hands trembled as she pulled on clothes and gently woke Camden, her mind spinning with questions she couldn't answer. Why was she Sebastian's emergency contact? How badly was he hurt? And why did the thought of losing him feel like losing a piece of herself she hadn't known existed? Mount Sinai's emergency room smelled like antiseptic and fear. Camden clung to her hand, his eyes wide as they navigated the maze of curtained beds and medical equipment. A nurse with kind eyes led them to Bay 7, where Sebastian sat on the edge of a hospital bed, his dress shirt torn and bloody, a butterfly bandage over his left eyebrow. "Aaliyah," the relief in his voice was palpable. "You came." "Of course I came." She wanted to run to him, to check for injuries herself, but something held her back. The formal distance they'd been maintaining, maybe, or the way Camden's small hand squeezed hers tighter. "Are you hurt? What happened?" "Drunk driver ran a red light," Sebastian said simply, wincing as he shifted position. "I'm fine. Bruised ribs, some cuts. Could have been much worse." "Uncle Bastian!" Camden broke free from Aaliyah's grip and scrambled onto the hospital bed, careful to avoid the IV line in Sebastian's arm. "You're hurt. Did the bad car bite you?" Sebastian's expression softened as he wrapped his good arm around Camden. "Something like that, buddy. But I'm okay. See? Just some scratches." "Aaliyah was scared," Camden announced with the brutal honesty of a 3-year-old. "She cried in the taxi." Heat flooded Aaliyah's cheeks. She hadn't realized Camden had noticed her tears. "I was just worried," she said quietly. Sebastian's gaze found hers over Camden's head, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings neither had admitted out loud. "Why am I your emergency contact?" she asked, needing to break the intensity of the moment. Sebastian looked uncomfortable. "I changed it yesterday, after the pancakes." He paused, searching for words. "I realized that if something happened to me, Camden would need you, and I would want you to know." The simple admission hit her harder than she expected. In less than a week, She had become important enough to this man that he wanted her notified if he was hurt. The responsibility of that trust settled over her like a blanket, warm and terrifying at the same time. "Mr. Kane," a doctor appeared at the foot of the bed, clipboard in hand. "Discharge papers are ready. Take it easy for a few days, ice the ribs, and follow up with your primary physician if the headaches worsen." "I can drive," Sebastian said, starting to stand. "No." Aaliyah's voice was firmer than she intended. "You're not driving anywhere. We'll take a car service." Sebastian raised an eyebrow. "Are you giving me orders, Miss Moore?" "Yes," she said simply. "I am." For a moment they stared at each other in a battle of wills. Then Camden piped up, "Aaliyah's right, Uncle Bastian. Hurt people shouldn't drive cars. That's dangerous." Sebastian's lips twitched. "Well, when you put it like that." The ride home was quiet, Camden asleep between them in the back seat of the town car. Sebastian's eyes were closed, his head resting against the window, and Aaliyah found herself studying his profile in the passing streetlights. The butterfly bandage, the way he held his left side carefully, the exhaustion etched in the lines around his eyes. She could have lost him tonight. The thought struck her with unexpected force. This man who had become so central to her world in such a short time could have been taken away by a drunk driver's poor decision. "Stop looking at me like that," Sebastian said quietly, not opening his eyes. "Like what?" "Like you're trying to memorize my face." Aaliyah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I wasn't—" "You were." He opened his eyes then, turning to face her. "The same way I've been looking at you when you're not watching." The admission hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Camden stirred in his sleep, his small body warm against Aaliyah's side. "Sebastian," she began, but he shook his head. "Not here. Not now. But soon, Aaliyah. We need to talk about what's happening between us." Back at the penthouse, Aaliyah helped Sebastian to his room, while Camden slept soundly in the guest bed. She had never been in Sebastian's private space before, and she tried not to stare at the masculine elegance of it. The king-size bed with its charcoal duvet, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the glimpse of expensive suits in the walk-in closet. "I can manage from here," Sebastian said, but his wince as he tried to remove his torn shirt betrayed him. "Don't be stubborn," Aaliyah said softly. "Let me help." She moved closer, her fingers finding the buttons of his shirt. The intimacy of the moment wasn't lost on either of them, her careful touch as she worked around his injuries, the way his breathing changed as her hands brushed against his skin. When she revealed the angry purple bruises across his ribs, she couldn't stop the small gasp that escaped her lips. "It looks worse than it is," Sebastian said quietly. "It looks terrible." Without thinking, she reached out to trace the edge of the bruising with feather-light fingers. Sebastian inhaled sharply at her touch, and she realized what she was doing. "I'm sorry," she whispered, starting to pull away. "Don't." His hand covered hers, holding it against his chest. "Don't apologize." They stood there in the dim bedroom light, her palm flat against his warm skin, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her fingers. The space between them hummed with tension and unspoken desires. "Aaliyah," Sebastian said, his voice rough with something that had nothing to do with his injuries. "Yes. When I was lying on that stretcher, waiting for the ambulance, do you know what I thought about?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "You. I thought about never seeing your smile again, never hearing you laugh with Camden, never getting the chance to tell you—" He paused, his thumb tracing across her knuckles. "Never getting the chance to tell you how you've changed everything." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Sebastian, I know this is complicated. I know I'm your employer, that there are boundaries we shouldn't cross. But tonight, lying there in that hospital bed, I realized that some things are more important than boundaries." Before she could respond, before she could think about all the reasons this was dangerous, Sebastian's free hand cupped her face, his thumb brushing across her cheek. "Tell me you feel it too," he whispered. "This pull between us. Tell me I'm not imagining it." Aaliyah looked into his dark eyes and saw her own longing reflected there. All her life, she had been careful, cautious, waiting for the right moment, the right person. But standing here in the lamplight of his bedroom, Sebastian's heart beating steadily beneath her palm, she realized that sometimes the right person comes disguised as everything you thought you didn't want. "You're not imagining it," she whispered. The confession seemed to unlock something in both of them. Sebastian's hand tightened on her face, drawing her closer, and Aaliyah felt herself moving toward him as if pulled by an invisible thread. But just as their lips were about to meet, Camden's voice echoed from down the hallway. "Aaliyah, I had a bad dream." They sprang apart like teenagers caught by parents, the spell broken by the innocent interruption. Aaliyah's cheeks burned as she realized how close they had come to crossing a line that would change everything. Camden needs me," she stammered, backing toward the door. "Aaliyah, wait." But she was already gone, fleeing down the hallway toward Camden's room and away from the terrifying realization that she was falling in love with Sebastian Kane. And from the way he had looked at her in those final moments, she suspected he was falling too. The most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves about what we don't want. Aaliyah stood at the kitchen window, watching the sun paint Central Park in shades of amber and gold, her coffee growing cold in her hands. She had been awake since 4 a.m., replaying every moment of the night before. Sebastian's admission, the feeling of his heart beating beneath her palm, the way his eyes had darkened just before Camden's voice shattered the spell between them. She touched her lips unconsciously, imagining what it would have felt like if Camden hadn't interrupted, if she had allowed herself to cross that line that had seemed so clear just a week ago and now felt as fragile as morning mist. Footsteps on the marble stairs made her turn. Sebastian appeared in the kitchen doorway, moving carefully, but dressed for work in a perfectly pressed charcoal suit. The butterfly bandage over his eyebrow was the only visible reminder of the accident, but she could see the careful way he held his left side. "You're up early," he said, his voice neutral, professional. The businessman was back, walls firmly in place. Couldn't sleep. She busied herself pouring him coffee, grateful for something to do with her hands. "How are you feeling?" "Fine. The ribs are just tender." He accepted the coffee but didn't drink it, instead studying her face with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. "About last night." "Nothing happened last night," Aaliyah said quickly, turning back to the window. "You were hurt. Emotions were high. People say things they don't mean when they're in shock." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. When Sebastian finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but firm. "Is that what you think? That I didn't mean what I said?" Before she could answer, Camden's voice echoed from upstairs. "Aaliyah, Uncle Bastian, come see my tower." "Saved by the bell," Sebastian murmured, but there was no amusement in his tone. They found Camden in his playroom, surrounded by an elaborate construction of blocks that reached nearly to his chest. His face beamed with pride as he gestured to his creation. "Look, it's the biggest tower ever. It's strong enough for anything." "It's amazing, sweetheart," Aaliyah said, kneeling beside him. "Tell me about it." "This part is where Uncle Bastian lives." Camden pointed to the top section. "And this part is where you live. And this part down here is where I live. We're all in the same tower." Aaliyah felt her cheeks warm, aware of Sebastian watching them from the doorway. That's a lovely tower, Camden." "But the best part," Camden continued, carefully placing one more block on top, "is that it doesn't fall down when bad things happen, because we all hold it up together." The innocent words hit Aaliyah like a physical blow. This little boy, who had lost his father and watched his mother leave, was building them into a family with blocks and hope. The responsibility of that trust, the fragility of the happiness he was constructing, made her chest tighten. "Camden," Sebastian said, stepping into the room, "I have to go to work soon. Will you be good for Aaliyah today? Can we make cookies? The smiley ones?" "If Aaliyah doesn't mind teaching another cooking lesson," Sebastian said, his gaze finding hers. "I don't mind," she said softly, though the thought of another intimate kitchen scene made her pulse quicken. "Good." Sebastian knelt carefully beside Camden, wincing slightly. "And Camden, thank you for taking care of me last night." "You were very brave." Camden puffed up with pride. "Daddy said boys have to take care of their families." "Your daddy was right." After Sebastian left for the office, with strict instructions to call if he felt dizzy or nauseous, Aaliyah tried to lose herself in Camden's routine. They played with blocks, read stories, and eventually made their way to the kitchen for the promised cookie lesson. But as she measured flour and Camden chatted about sprinkles, her mind kept drifting to Sebastian's words. "Tell me you feel it too." "Aaliyah?" Camden's voice broke through her reverie. "Are you sad?" She looked down to find him watching her with the uncanny perception children sometimes possessed. "Why would you think I'm sad, sweetie?" "You have the same face Mama had before she went on the airplane," Camden said seriously. "Like you're thinking about leaving too." The observation struck her like a physical blow. Was that what she was doing? Planning her escape before things got too complicated? "I'm not leaving, Camden," she said firmly, kneeling to his level. "I promised you I would stay, remember? But what if Uncle Bastian makes you sad? What if you don't want to live in our tower anymore? The question revealed a depth of understanding that broke her heart. This little boy was already preparing for another abandonment, already trying to understand adult emotions that were too complex for his 3-year-old world. "Camden," she said, cupping his small face in her flour-dusted hands, "sometimes grown-ups have complicated feelings, but that doesn't mean they stop loving the people who are important to them. Do you love Uncle Bastien?" The question hung in the air like a butterfly, beautiful, fragile, impossible to catch. Thalia felt her heart stutter as she searched for an answer that was both honest and appropriate. "I care about your uncle very much," she said carefully, "and I care about you. That's not going to change." Camden nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Good, because I think Uncle Bastien loves you too. He smiles different when you're here." Before Alia could ask what he meant, the elevator chimed. She glanced at the kitchen clock. 2:15 p.m. Sebastian wasn't supposed to be home for hours. "Alia," Sebastian's voice echoed from the foyer, tight with something that sounded like anger. She and Camden made their way to the living room, where Sebastian stood holding a manila envelope, his jaw clenched. He had loosened his tie, and his usually perfect hair looked like he'd been running his hands through it. "What's wrong?" Alia asked. "I need to ask you something," Sebastian said, his voice carefully controlled. "And I need you to be completely honest with me." The formal tone sent alarm bells ringing in her head. "Of course." Sebastian opened the envelope and withdrew a photograph, holding it out to her. "Do you know this man?" Alia's blood turned to ice. The photograph showed her having coffee with Marcus Webb, a journalist she'd dated briefly 2 years ago. But more importantly, Marcus worked for one of New York's most notorious gossip magazines. "That's Marcus," she said quietly. We went out a few times. But Sebastian, I haven't seen him in over a year." "This photo was taken yesterday," Sebastian said, his voice like steel. "While I was in the hospital. My security team brought it to my attention an hour ago." The implication hit her like a slap. "You think I called him? You think I told him about your accident?" "I think," Sebastian said carefully, "that it's quite a coincidence that a gossip journalist just happens to run into my son's nanny the day after I end up in the emergency room." Camden looked between them with growing confusion. "Why are you using angry voices?" "Camden, go play in your room for a few minutes," Alia said, not taking her eyes off Sebastian. "Grown-up talk." After Camden reluctantly left, Alia turned back to Sebastian, hurt and anger warring in her chest. "You really think I would sell information about your family to a tabloid?" "I think," Sebastian said, his businessman's mask firmly in place, "that people do unexpected things for money. And Marcus Webb offered quite a substantial amount for details about my personal life." "How do you know what he offered?" "Because he called my office this morning, claiming to have an inside source about my secret family situation." Sebastian's eyes were cold, distant. Imagine my surprise when he mentioned details only someone living in this house would know. Alia felt the room tilt. "What details?" "Camden's nightmares, my cooking disasters, the fact that I changed my emergency contact." Sebastian's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Very specific, very personal details, Alia." The accusation hung between them like a sword. Alia felt everything they had built, the trust, the growing intimacy, the possibility of something beautiful, crumbling around her feet. "I didn't tell him anything," she said, her voice shaking. "Sebastian, you have to believe me. I would never—" "Then explain the photograph." "I can't," she admitted, and saw something die in his eyes. I can't explain why he was there, but I swear to you, I never spoke to him about you or Camden or anything that happens in this house." Sebastian studied her face for a long moment, and she could see him weighing her words against the evidence. The fact that he had to think about it, that her word wasn't enough, cut deeper than any accusation. "I want to believe you," he said finally. "But you don't." "I don't know what to believe." The admission hung between them, honest and devastating. Alia felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. She had spent her whole life being careful, being trustworthy, building a reputation based on integrity. To have it questioned now by the man she was falling in love with felt like losing a piece of herself. "Then I guess we have a problem," she said quietly. Sebastian's expression softened slightly. "Alia, no." She held up a hand, needing distance before she said something she couldn't take back. "You've made your position clear. You think I'm capable of betraying your trust for money. There's not much more to discuss." "That's not what I said. It's what you meant." They stared at each other across the living room, the space between them feeling like an ocean. Everything that had been building between them, the stolen glances, the almost kiss, the growing intimacy, lay in ruins around their feet. "I need some air," Aaliyah said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. "I'll take Camden to the park." As she turned to leave, Sebastian's voice stopped her. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I hope I'm wrong." Aaliyah paused in the doorway, but didn't turn around. "So do I," she whispered. "Because if you're not, we've both lost something we can never get back." The hardest part about falling isn't the impact. It's the moment you realize there's no one there to catch you. Central Park buzzed with afternoon life around them, but Aaliyah felt isolated in a bubble of hurt and confusion. Camden ran ahead on the playground, his laughter a stark contrast to the storm clouds gathering in her chest. She sat on a bench, phone in hand, staring at Marcus Webb's contact information. She hadn't spoken to him in over a year. Their brief relationship had ended amicably enough. He was charming but superficial, more interested in networking than genuine connection. Nothing like Sebastian, whose intensity both thrilled and terrified her. Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. Marcus's name flashed on the screen. "Don't answer it," she whispered to herself, but her finger moved to accept the call before she could think better of it. "Aaliyah Moore," Marcus's smooth voice filled her ear. "Beautiful as ever, I see." Her blood ran cold. "You've been watching me. Just happened to be in the neighborhood yesterday. Couldn't help but notice you looked troubled. Everything all right in paradise?" "What do you want, Marcus?" "Same thing I've always wanted. A good story. And honey, the story about Sebastian Kane's mysterious live-in situation is worth a fortune." His voice turned calculating. "Word is he's got quite the domestic setup going on. Single father, gorgeous nanny, penthouses, and secrets. My readers eat that stuff up." Aaliyah's grip tightened on the phone. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Come on, Aaliyah. We both know you're living in his penthouse, taking care of his kid, playing house with one of Manhattan's most eligible bachelors." Marcus's laugh was cold. "Question is, are you going to help me tell the story, or do I have to get creative with my sources?" "There is no story. There's always a story, and if you won't talk to me willingly—" He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "Well, let's just say I have other ways of getting information. Ways that might be less flattering to everyone involved." The line went dead, leaving Aaliyah staring at her phone with shaking hands. The conversation confirmed what Sebastian suspected, but it also revealed something worse. Marcus was digging whether she cooperated or not. "Aaliyah!" Camden's voice cut through her panic. "Push me on the swings!" She forced a smile and pocketed her phone, but her mind raced as she pushed Camden higher and higher. Marcus had photographed her yesterday, which meant he'd been following her. For how long? What else had he seen? "You look sad again," Camden observed, his small hands gripping the swing chains tightly. "Just thinking, sweetheart." "About Uncle Bastian?" The perceptiveness of children never ceased to amaze her. "Something like that." "He's sad too," Camden said matter-of-factly. "He was making his angry phone voice when we left." Aaliyah's chest tightened. Sebastian was probably calling his lawyers, his security team, maybe even employment agencies to find her replacement. The thought of leaving Camden, of walking away from the family they'd been building, made her physically nauseous. By the time they returned to the penthouse, the afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the marble floors. The silence that greeted them felt different, heavier, more final. Sebastian's briefcase sat by the elevator, suggesting he'd come home early again. "Uncle Bastian," Camden called out, running toward the living room. "We fed the ducks, and Aaliyah taught me about cloud shapes." Aaliyah followed more slowly, finding Sebastian standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to them. He'd changed from his suit into dark jeans and a grey sweater, but his posture remained rigid. "Did you have a good time at the park?" he asked Camden without turning around. "Yes." But Aaliyah's phone made her sad. A man called and said mean things. Sebastian turned then, his dark eyes finding hers immediately. "What man?" Aaliyah's mouth went dry. She could lie, pretend the call never happened, but Camden's innocent honesty had already revealed too much. "Marcus called," she admitted quietly. Something dangerous flashed in Sebastian's eyes. "And?" "And he threatened to publish whatever story he wanted with or without my cooperation." She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. "Which proves I wasn't his source, doesn't it? If I was feeding him information, why would he need to threaten me?" Sebastian studied her face for a long moment. "What exactly did he threaten?" He said he had other ways of getting information, ways that might be less flattering to everyone involved. Bastard, Sebastian muttered under his breath, then caught himself. Sorry, Camden. It's okay, Camden said cheerfully. Mama used to say bad words when she was worried too. The innocent comment hung in the air, a reminder of all the loss this little boy had already endured. Aaliyah saw Sebastian's expression soften as he looked at his nephew. Camden, why don't you go play in your room for a little while? Sebastian said gently. Aaliyah and I need to have an adult conversation. After Camden left, reluctantly dragging his stuffed elephant behind him, Sebastian turned back to Aaliyah. The distance between them felt like a chasm. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. Do you? I let fear make me suspicious. I let my past experiences color my judgment of you. He ran a hand through his hair. I'm not good at trust, Aaliyah. I've built my entire life around the principle that people will eventually disappoint you if you give them the chance. And yet, you made me your emergency contact. Because with you, I wanted to try. His voice was rough with emotion. For the first time in my adult life, I met someone who made me want to believe in the possibility of something real. Aaliyah felt tears prick her eyes. Wanted to. Past tense. No. Sebastian stepped closer, close enough that she could see the regret in his dark eyes. Want to. Present tense. I still want to believe, Aaliyah. I'm just terrified of being wrong. Why? The simple question seemed to cost her everything to ask, and him everything to answer. Because I'm falling in love with you, he said quietly. And I've never been in love before. I don't know the rules. I don't know how to protect myself or Camden or you from the consequences of that. The confession hit her like a physical blow, not because it was unexpected, but because it echoed the truth she'd been trying to deny to herself. Sebastian, I know it's complicated. I know there are boundaries I shouldn't cross, professional lines that shouldn't be blurred. But Christ, Aaliyah, when I thought you might have betrayed us, it felt like someone had ripped my heart out. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. I would never hurt Camden. Never. Whatever you think of me, I think you're the strongest, most genuine person I've ever met, Sebastian interrupted. I think Camden adores you, and I think you've made this house feel like a home for the first time in my life. I think I was an ass for doubting you, even for a moment. But you did doubt me. Yes, he admitted, and I'll probably doubt again because trust doesn't come naturally to me. But I want to learn, Aaliyah, if you'll teach me. They stood facing each other in the golden afternoon light, the weight of everything said and unsaid hanging between them. Aaliyah felt her carefully constructed walls crumbling, the protective distance she'd been trying to maintain dissolving like mist. I'm falling in love with you too, she whispered, and it terrifies me. Sebastian's eyes closed briefly, as if her words caused him physical pain. Where does that leave us? I don't know. We need to figure this out, Sebastian said, because Marcus Webb isn't going away. If anything, he'll dig deeper now, try to find dirt on both of us. And if he publishes some twisted version of our story, Camden gets hurt, Aaliyah finished. Camden gets hurt, Sebastian confirmed, and I won't let that happen. The protectiveness in his voice made her chest warm, even as the implications of their situation settled over her like a cold blanket. They were trapped between their growing feelings and the need to protect Camden from scandal. So, what do we do? She asked. Sebastian moved closer, close enough to touch, but he kept his hands at his sides. We be careful. We keep things professional in public, and we figure out how to handle Marcus Webb before he destroys everything we're building. And between us, Sebastian's gaze searched her face, between us we take it one day at a time. We learn to trust each other, and we see if what we're feeling is strong enough to survive the storm that's coming. Aaliyah nodded, but fear clenched in her stomach, because something in Sebastian's tone suggested he already knew the storm would be worse than either of them imagined. Sebastian? She said, as he turned toward his office. Yes? When you said you'd probably doubt again, does that mean you still don't completely trust me? He paused in the doorway, his back to her. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I want to trust you completely, Aaliyah, but there's something you should know about me. I've never trusted anyone completely, not even myself. As his footsteps faded down the hallway, Aaliyah sank onto the couch, his words echoing in her mind. Because if Sebastian Kane couldn't trust himself, how could he ever truly trust her? And more terrifying still, what would happen when Marcus Webb inevitably found the ammunition he was looking for? Sometimes love isn't enough to hold something together. Sometimes it's exactly what tears it apart. The morning started like any other. Aaliyah hummed softly as she prepared Camden's breakfast, the routine movements comforting in their familiarity. 3 days had passed since her confrontation with Sebastian, 3 days of careful politeness and stolen glances, of sleeping just down the hall from the man she loved but couldn't touch. Sebastian appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed for work, his dark suit immaculate despite the exhaustion evident in his eyes. They had been dancing around each other like cautious strangers, both afraid to shatter the fragile peace they'd constructed. "Good morning," he said quietly, accepting the coffee she offered. "Morning." Their fingers brushed as she handed him the cup, and she felt the familiar jolt of electricity that had been torturing them both. "Mama Aaliyah," Camden's voice broke the tension as he scrambled into the kitchen in his superhero pajamas. "Look, I lost a tooth." The innocent words hit Aaliyah like a physical blow. "Mama." Camden had never called her that before. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, kneeling to examine his gap-toothed grin. "That's wonderful. The tooth fairy will definitely visit tonight." "Will she bring money?" Camden asked, bouncing with excitement. "She might," Aaliyah said, glancing up to find Sebastian watching them with an unreadable expression. "I'll make sure she does," Sebastian said softly, and something in his voice made Aaliyah's chest tighten. The morning routine continued, but the word mama hung in the air between them like a promise and a threat. As Sebastian prepared to leave for work, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. His expression darkened as he read the caller ID. "I have to take this," he said, stepping into the hallway. Aaliyah couldn't make out the words, but she could hear the tension in Sebastian's voice rising. When he returned to the kitchen, his face was pale. "That was my head of security," he said quietly. "Marcus Webb published his story. It goes live online in an hour." The words hit her like ice water. "What story? He doesn't have any real information." "He doesn't need real information," Sebastian said grimly. "He has photos, speculation, and enough half-truths to spin whatever narrative he wants." Camden looked between them with growing confusion. "What's wrong? Why do you both look scared?" Before either could answer, Sebastian's phone rang again, then Aaliyah's, then the penthouse landline. The storm Marcus had threatened was breaking over them with devastating force. "Don't answer," Sebastian said, but it was too late. The damage was already done. Sebastian's assistant called next, her voice tight with professional strain. "Sir, we've had 17 media requests in the past 20 minutes. The story is trending on social media. I think you need to see this." Sebastian's tablet materialized as if from nowhere, his fingers moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. When he found the article, his jaw clenched so tightly Aaliyah could see the muscle jumping. "What does it say?" she whispered. Sebastian turned the tablet toward her, and Aaliyah felt the world tilt on its axis. The headline screamed, "Billionaire's Secret Family, Sebastian Kane's Hidden Life with Mysterious Live-In Lover and Child." The article was worse than she'd imagined. Marcus had woven together photos of her with Camden at the park, shots of Sebastian's penthouse, and carefully worded speculation that painted her as a gold-digging opportunist who had seduced her way into a wealthy man's home. The piece implied that Camden was Sebastian's biological son, born from a secret relationship, and that Aaliyah was now positioning herself to become the next Mrs. Kane. Every private moment they'd shared, every genuine feeling, was twisted into something sordid and calculating. "This is a disaster," Sebastian said quietly, sinking into a chair. "My board is probably in emergency session as we speak. The custody arrangement with Camden could be questioned, and your reputation—" "My reputation was never worth protecting anyway," Aaliyah said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "But Camden's is, and yours." "What do we do?" Camden asked, his small voice cutting through their panic. "Did we do something bad?" Aaliyah knelt beside him, her heart breaking at the confusion in his eyes. "No, sweetheart. Some people like to make up stories about other people, but we didn't do anything wrong." "Then why is everyone calling? Why do you and Uncle Bastien look so worried?" Before she could answer, the elevator chimed. Sebastian frowned. No one should have access to their private floor without permission. The elevator doors opened to reveal a woman in her 50s with steel-grey hair and a no-nonsense expression. She wore an expensive navy suit and carried herself with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Hello, Sebastian," she said coolly. "I think we need to talk." Sebastian's face went ashen. "Mother, what are you doing here?" Aaliyah's stomach dropped. Sebastian had mentioned his mother exactly once, describing her as complicated. The way she was looking at Aaliyah suggested the complication was about to get much worse. I'm here because my son is splashed across every gossip site in America, apparently living in sin with his employee while caring for his dead brother's child. Victoria Kane's voice could have frozen fire. The family lawyers are concerned about the custody arrangement. The board is concerned about the company's reputation, and I am concerned about what this scandal will do to the Kane name. Mrs. Kane, Aaliyah began, but Victoria's sharp gaze silenced her. Miss Moore, isn't it? The nanny who's managed to insert herself quite thoroughly into my family's business. Victoria's smile was all teeth and no warmth. How convenient that you were available when Sebastian needed help with Camden. How fortuitous that you happened to be young, attractive, and presumably naive enough to seem innocent in all this. That's enough, Sebastian said sharply, moving to stand beside Aaliyah. Aaliyah has done nothing wrong. This situation isn't her fault, isn't it? Victoria pulled out her own tablet, scrolling through what appeared to be a thorough background report. Miss Aaliyah Moore, 24, no significant assets, no family money, previous employment with 3 wealthy families in Manhattan. Quite the pattern, wouldn't you say? Mother, did you know she dated Marcus Webb 2 years ago, the same Marcus Webb who just published this exposé? Victoria's voice was surgical in its precision. Curious how her ex-boyfriend happened to be in the right place at the right time to document her new arrangement. Aaliyah felt the blood drain from her face. The implication was clear, devastating, and impossible to disprove. You think I planned this, she whispered. For you think I orchestrated this entire situation. I think, Victoria said carefully, that you're a very clever young woman who saw an opportunity and took it. The question is whether my son is too infatuated to see it clearly. Sebastian's face was a mask of conflicting emotions. Aaliyah could see him weighing his mother's words against everything he thought he knew about her. The doubt creeping into his eyes was like watching him die in front of her. Sebastian, Aaliyah said quietly, you know me. You know I would never... Do I? The question escaped him like a wound. 2 weeks ago, I didn't even know you existed. Now my entire life is imploding, and somehow you're at the center of it all. The words hit her like physical blows. This was Sebastian's deepest fear made manifest, trusting someone completely and discovering they were exactly what he'd always suspected people would be. I think, Victoria said smoothly, that Miss Moore should pack her things and leave today, with appropriate compensation, of course, and a generous severance package that includes a non-disclosure agreement. No, Camden's voice cut through the adult tension like a knife. Aaliyah can't leave. She promised she would stay. She promised. The little boy ran to Aaliyah, wrapping his arms around her legs, and she felt her heart shatter completely. In trying to protect Camden from scandal, they had created exactly the situation that would hurt him most. Camden, sweetheart, she began. You promised, he sobbed against her leg. You promised you wouldn't leave like Mama did. Aaliyah looked up to find Sebastian watching them, his face a battleground of love and suspicion, need and self-protection. She could see the moment when his walls rebuilt themselves, when the businessman replaced the man who had whispered confessions of love just days before. Perhaps, he said carefully, some distance would be best, until this situation resolves itself. The formal words hit her harder than any accusation. Distance, situation, as if their love had been reduced to a corporate problem requiring management. I see, Aaliyah said quietly, gently disentangling Camden's arms from her legs. I'll pack my things. Aaliyah, wait! Sebastian took a step toward her, but his mother's sharp look stopped him. This is for the best, Sebastian, Victoria said firmly, for everyone involved. As Aaliyah climbed the stairs to her room, Camden's broken sobs echoing behind her, she realized the cruelest irony of all. She had finally found the love she'd been waiting for her entire life, and it was exactly what had destroyed them all. The deepest truths are often found in the wreckage of everything we thought we knew. Aaliyah stood in her small Queen's apartment, surrounded by the boxes she'd hastily packed just hours earlier. The silence was deafening after weeks of Camden's laughter and Sebastian's quiet presence. Her phone had been ringing non-stop. Reporters, curiosity seekers, even old acquaintances suddenly interested in her story. She had turned it off an hour ago, unable to bear another intrusion into her grief. The knock at her door came at 9:47 p.m., sharp and insistent. Through the peephole, she saw a woman she didn't recognize. Mid-30s, blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun, expensive clothes that screamed lawyer or corporate executive. Miss Moore, my name is Jennifer Walsh. I'm head of security for Kane Hospitality. We need to talk. Against her better judgment, Aaliyah opened the door. Jennifer Walsh had the kind of presence that commanded attention, sharp eyes that missed nothing, and a bearing that suggested she was used to getting answers. "What do you want?" Aaliyah asked, not inviting her in. "To give you information that might change everything," Jennifer said simply. "May I come in? What I have to show you isn't something we should discuss in a hallway." Aaliyah hesitated, then stepped aside. Jennifer entered the small apartment, her gaze taking in the sparse furnishings and packed boxes with professional assessment. "You didn't waste any time leaving," Jennifer observed. "I wasn't given much choice." Jennifer nodded grimly. "That's what I thought. Miss Moore, I've been investigating the Marcus Webb situation since the first photo surfaced. What I've discovered, well, let's just say someone has been playing a very long game." She opened her tablet, pulling up a series of documents and photographs. "Tell me, when exactly did you start dating Marcus Webb 2 years ago? I don't see how that's relevant. Please, it's important." Aaliyah thought back to that brief, forgettable relationship. "It was October, I think. October 2 years ago. We met at a coffee shop in Midtown. He said he was a freelance writer working on lifestyle pieces." "And he approached you?" "Yes. He said I had an interesting face, asked if he could buy me coffee." The memory felt tainted now, knowing what Marcus was capable of. "Why?" Jennifer swiped to a new document on her tablet. "Because October 2 years ago was exactly 1 month after Sebastian's brother Daniel died, and Marcus Webb wasn't working on lifestyle pieces. He was already being paid by a consortium of Sebastian's business rivals to find dirt on the Kane family." The words hit Aaliyah like a physical blow. "That's impossible. Marcus and I dated for 2 months. It was completely normal." "Was it?" Jennifer pulled up another document. "Did he ask a lot of questions about your work, about the families you cared for? Did he seem particularly interested when you mentioned working for wealthy Manhattan families?" Aaliyah's stomach turned as memories flooded back. Marcus had been curious about her job, asking seemingly innocent questions about her employers, their homes, their routines. At the time, she'd thought he was just showing interest in her life. "You think he targeted me?" she said quietly. "I think Marcus Webb has been building a file on Sebastian Kane for 2 years, waiting for the right opportunity. When Sebastian's name came up in connection with custody of his nephew, Marcus activated his contingency plan." Jennifer swiped to another screen. "You. But that would mean he's been tracking your employment, your movements, possibly even orchestrating your meeting with Mrs. Whitmore. The Whitmores didn't just randomly find your name through an agency, Miss Moore. They were specifically directed to you by someone who knew Marcus had a connection to you." Aaliyah sank onto her couch, the implications crashing over her like waves. "He used me. For 2 years he used me. And more importantly," Jennifer continued, "someone paid him to do it. The question is who?" Before Aaliyah could respond, Jennifer's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her expression growing grim. "We need to go, now." "Go where?" "To the Kane penthouse. There's something happening that you need to see." The ride back to the penthouse felt surreal. Aaliyah stared out the window at the city lights, trying to process everything Jennifer had told her. If Marcus had been manipulating her from the beginning, if someone had orchestrated her entire connection to Sebastian's family, who would do this? She asked quietly. Jennifer's jaw tightened. Someone with a lot to gain from Sebastian's downfall. Someone who knew exactly which pressure points to target. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt endless. When the doors opened, Aaliyah could hear raised voices from the living room, Sebastian's deep tones clashing with his mother's sharp responses, and another voice she didn't recognize. "Absolutely no evidence to support these ridiculous accusations. The evidence is sitting in front of you, Victoria." The unfamiliar voice was male, older, with the kind of authority that came from decades of wielding power. "Your son's judgment has been compromised by his infatuation with this girl. The board has serious concerns." Jennifer motioned for Aaliyah to stay in the foyer as she approached the living room. "Mr. Kane, I have the information you requested." The voices stopped abruptly. Aaliyah heard footsteps, then Sebastian's voice, rough with exhaustion. "What did you find?" "Everything," Jennifer said simply. "Miss Moore, you can come in now." Aaliyah entered the living room to find Sebastian standing by the windows, his hair disheveled, and his usually perfect appearance showing signs of stress. Victoria Kane sat rigidly on the white sofa, while an older man in an expensive suit occupied the armchair, undoubtedly a member of Sebastian's board. Sebastian's eyes found hers immediately, and she saw a war of emotions playing across his face. Relief, regret, and something that might have been hope. "Aaliyah," he said quietly. "Jennifer told me about Marcus." About the investigation. Show them, Jennifer said, handing Sebastian her tablet. Sebastian's expression grew darker as he scrolled through the documents. 2 years. He's been planning this for 2 years. But that's not the worst part, Jennifer said grimly. Show them the financial records. Sebastian's face went ashen. He looked up at the older man in the armchair, his expression a mixture of betrayal and rage. Richard, you funded this. The man, Richard, shifted uncomfortably. Sebastian, you have to understand. Your brother's death changed you. You became reckless, emotional. The board felt intervention was necessary. You hired a tabloid journalist to destroy my personal life because you thought I was too emotional. Sebastian's voice was deadly quiet. We hired someone to document your poor judgment. The goal was to present evidence to remove you from active leadership until you could think clearly again. We never anticipated it would go this far. You never anticipated I would fall in love, Sebastian said, his gaze finding Aaliyah's. You never anticipated that someone might actually care about Camden and me, not for our money, but for who we are. Victoria Kane had gone pale. Richard, please tell me you didn't... Marcus Webb was paid to infiltrate Miss Moore's life 2 years ago, Jennifer said, her voice cutting through the tension. He was instructed to build a relationship with her, gather information about her employment patterns, and wait for an opportunity to create a scandal. When Sebastian took custody of Camden and hired Aaliyah, they activated their plan. Aaliyah felt sick. Everything Marcus and I had, it was all fake. He never cared about me at all. No, Sebastian said firmly, moving toward her. But everything we have is real. Everything Camden feels for you is real. The way you've changed our lives, the love you've brought into our home, none of that was part of anyone's plan. Sebastian, Richard said desperately, you have to see reason. This woman, Sebastian interrupted, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority, is the best thing that's ever happened to my family. She's caring, honest, and she loves Camden like he was her own child, which is more than I can say for the people I trusted to have my back. He turned to face Richard fully, his businessman's mask firmly in place. You're fired from the board effective immediately. Security will escort you out. If you ever come near my family again, I'll have you arrested for harassment. You can't do this. I can and I am. Jennifer, please see Mr. Hardwick out. As Jennifer escorted the protesting Richard toward the elevator, Victoria Kane stood slowly. Sebastian, perhaps I was hasty in my judgment. Perhaps you were, Sebastian agreed coldly. But that doesn't excuse the damage you helped cause. Victoria's gaze moved to Aaliyah, and for the first time, there was something approaching respect in her eyes. Miss Moore, I owe you an apology. It appears I allowed my concerns for my family's reputation to cloud my judgment about your character. Apology accepted, Aaliyah said quietly, though the words felt hollow after everything that had happened. After Victoria left, promising to handle the media situation, Sebastian and Aaliyah were finally alone. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they needed to say and everything they'd lost. Where's Camden? Aaliyah asked. Asleep. He cried himself to exhaustion asking for you. Sebastian's voice broke slightly. Aaliyah, I'm so sorry. I should have trusted you. I should have fought for you instead of letting my fear make me weak. You weren't weak, she said softly. You were protecting Camden, I understand that. Do you? Because I'm not sure I understand it myself. Sebastian moved closer, close enough that she could see the exhaustion and regret in his dark eyes. I told you I was falling in love with you, and then at the first test I failed. I let doubt win instead of love. Tears spilled down Aaliyah's cheeks. Sebastian, I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I've broken something between us that might not be fixable. But Aaliyah, if there's any possibility, any chance at all that you could forgive me. He dropped to his knees in front of her, taking her hands in his. I love you. Not just falling in love. I love you completely, desperately, with everything I have. You brought light into a house that had only known shadows. You made Camden smile again. You made me believe in the possibility of family, of trust, of love that doesn't come with conditions. Aaliyah looked down at this powerful man kneeling before her, bearing his heart in the wreckage of everything they'd built and lost. I love you too, she whispered. But Sebastian, how do we move forward from this? How do we rebuild what was broken? Together, he said simply. One day at a time, one act of trust at a time, one moment of choosing love over fear. He squeezed her hands gently. Marry me, Aaliyah. The words hung in the air between them, impossible and perfect at the same time. "That's not a proposal," she said through her tears. "That's a prayer." "Then let me do this right," Sebastian said, reaching into his jacket pocket. But before he could continue, Camden's sleepy voice drifted from the stairway. "Aaliyah, did you come home?" And in that moment, looking at the little boy who had called her Mama, at the man who had learned to love despite his fear, Aaliyah realized that some prayers are answered not with perfection, but with the courage to choose love anyway. 1 year later. Love doesn't erase the scars, it teaches them to tell a different story. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows of their new home in Greenwich, Connecticut, painting everything in shades of gold and possibility. Aaliyah stood at the stove, humming softly as she flipped pancakes, smiley ones naturally, while the sound of laughter drifted in from the backyard. Through the window, she could see Sebastian chasing 4-year-old Camden around the swing set they'd installed last month, both of them covered in dirt from their archaeological expedition in the garden. Sebastian's expensive suits had been replaced by worn jeans and t-shirts on weekends, his transformation from untouchable businessman to devoted father complete in all the ways that mattered. "Mama Aaliyah," Camden's voice called from the sliding door. "Uncle Daddy says breakfast smells like heaven." Uncle Daddy. It was Camden's own creation, a title that perfectly captured Sebastian's role in his life. Uncle by blood, father by choice, protector by love. The adoption papers had been finalized 3 months ago, making Sebastian legally what he had always been emotionally, Camden's dad. "Tell Uncle Daddy that heaven includes orange juice and fresh strawberries," Aaliyah called back, unable to stop smiling. Even after a year, the simple domesticity of their life together still felt like a miracle. Sebastian appeared in the doorway, Camden perched on his shoulders, both of them grinning with the satisfaction of a morning well spent. Sebastian's hair was mussed, his t-shirt had a suspicious dirt stain, and he had never looked more handsome. "Good morning, Mrs. Kane," he said, his voice carrying the same warmth it held every time he said her new name. "Good morning, Mr. Kane," she replied, rising on her tiptoes to kiss him as Camden giggled above them. "Yuck, grown-up kisses," Camden announced, but his smile suggested he didn't mind the affection as much as he pretended. Sebastian lifted Camden down and moved to stand behind Aaliyah at the stove, his arms circling her waist as he watched her work. "Need help with anything?" "Just keep me company," she said, leaning back against his chest. "Tell me about your archaeological discoveries." "Well," Sebastian said seriously, "Camden and I have determined that our backyard was once inhabited by dinosaurs, pirates, and possibly space aliens." "All at the same time?" Aaliyah asked with mock surprise. "Obviously," Camden chimed in, settling at the breakfast table. "That's why it's the best backyard ever." As they sat down to eat, Aaliyah caught Sebastian's eye across the table and saw the same wonder there that she felt every morning. Not wonder at their success or their beautiful home, or even their happiness, but wonder at the simple fact that they had found each other at all. The journey to this moment hadn't been easy. The scandal had taken months to fully die down. Marcus Webb had been arrested for fraud and harassment, and Sebastian's board had undergone a complete restructuring. But through it all, they had chosen each other, daily, deliberately, with the kind of intentional love that grows stronger under pressure. "So," Sebastian said, cutting into his smiley pancakes, "what's on the agenda for today?" "The farmer's market," Camden announced, "and then the bookstore. And then, can we visit Grandma Victoria?" Aaliyah's relationship with Sebastian's mother had evolved slowly, built on mutual respect and their shared love for Camden and Sebastian. Victoria Kane was still formidable, still occasionally sharp-tongued, but she had proven capable of growth in ways that had surprised them all. "Grandma Victoria is coming here for dinner," Sebastian reminded Camden, along with Aunt Jasmine and Uncle Drew. Aaliyah smiled at the mention of her best friend and her new husband. Jasmine had been one of Aaliyah's bridesmaids, tearfully declaring that she had never seen her best friend glow the way she did when Sebastian looked at her. "And after dinner?" Camden asked hopefully. "After dinner you have a bath and bedtime stories," Aaliyah said firmly, though her tone was gentle. "Will you tell me the story about the princess who waited for love?" Aaliyah's heart clenched with remembered emotion. "If you want. But this time, tell me the part about how she found her prince and they built a castle together, with a little boy who got to be their son." Sebastian's hand found hers across the table, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. Some fairy tales, it turned out, did come true, just not in the way anyone expected. After breakfast, as they prepared for their day, Sebastian pulled Aaliyah aside in their bedroom. The space was theirs now, decorated with photos of their small family, books they both loved, and the comfortable accumulation of a shared life. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small wrapped package from his dresser drawer. "It's not my birthday," Aaliyah protested, but she was already unwrapping it with the curiosity he loved about her. Inside was a delicate silver locket, engraved with 3 words: trust, love, family. "Sebastian," she breathed, running her finger over the engraving. "I had it made to commemorate our first anniversary," he said, taking it from her hands to fasten around her neck. "Inside is a photo from our wedding day, the one of you and Camden laughing while I tried to figure out how to cut the cake." Aaliyah opened the locket to see the tiny photo, and her eyes filled with tears. It captured a perfect moment of joy, the 3 of them caught in a burst of laughter that told the story of their love better than any posed portrait could. "I love it," she whispered. "I love you. Even when I'm covered in dirt and chasing dinosaurs in the backyard. Especially then." Sebastian cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her happy tears. "A year ago, I thought I knew what my life would look like. Controlled, predictable, safe. I never imagined it could be this good." "What part?" Aaliyah asked, though she knew the answer. "All of it. The chaos and the laughter and the pancakes and the bedtime stories. The way Camden calls me Uncle Daddy like it's the most natural thing in the world. The way you hum while you cook. The way our house feels like a home because you're in it." He paused, his voice growing rough with emotion. "But mostly, I never imagined I could love someone the way I love you. Completely. Without reservation. Without fear." "No fear at all?" Aaliyah teased gently. "Well," Sebastian admitted with a smile, "maybe a little fear. The good kind. The kind that makes you hold on tighter to what matters." From downstairs, Camden's voice called up to them. "Are we going to the market or not? The dinosaurs are getting impatient." They laughed, the sound mixing and harmonizing like everything else in their life together. As they walked downstairs hand in hand, Aaliyah caught sight of their reflection in the hallway mirror. Sebastian in his weekend clothes, hair still mussed from their morning adventure, herself in a simple sundress, the new locket catching the light at her throat, and Camden racing ahead of them, chattering about all the adventures the day might hold. They looked like what they were, a family, not perfect, not without their challenges, but real and loving and whole. "Ready for whatever comes next?" Sebastian asked as they reached the bottom of the stairs. Aaliyah squeezed his hand, thinking of the journey that had brought them here, from that first morning in the penthouse kitchen to this moment of complete happiness. They had learned to trust each other, to choose love over fear, to build something beautiful from the broken pieces of their past. "With you and Camden," she said, watching their son try to convince them that he needed to bring his stuffed elephant to the farmer's market for emotional support. "I'm ready for everything." Because some love stories don't end with happily ever after. They begin with it. And theirs was just getting started. Final message to viewers. What would you do if love knocked down every wall you'd built to protect yourself? Would you have the courage to choose trust over fear, even when everything seemed lost? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear how this story touched your heart. Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.